Welcome to part 2 of the Indie Book Club's chat to Stewart Home. So the first half of our podcast focused on his career as an artist and a novelist and also a writer of non-fiction books. And the second half is going to dig into why he decided to write Fascist Yoga, which exposes the underbelly of Western yoga practice, especially the postural practice. So we'll get straight back into part 2. I was really interested when you said you spent, after you gave up your job cutting squares for buses, you read Hegel and would watch kung fu movies, and that led to the whole Bruce-exploitation thing.
Yeah, I mean, I always, from when I was at school, I liked the Bruce Lee films and the other kung fu films. And again, it was a different era because here they all got, generally there was the odd AA, which meant you could get in at 14, but they generally got X certificates, which meant you had to be 18. But it was really interesting because if you tried to see The Exorcist, which was an X certificate, you get turned away because it wasn't suitable. But, 9 times out of 10, if you went to see Bruce Lee film or another kung fu film, Cheng Pei Pei or whichever stars you happen to like, Angela Mao, I liked all those kind of big old school kung fu names, you generally get in, but you'd have to pay the adult price. So from when I was 12...
Would they let you in because the violence is seen as quite stylized in those movies, whereas, The Exorcist is horror or...
Yeah. I don't know. They just had some weird thing. It would just be like, okay, you're 18. If the police come in and ask you, you tell them you're 18. You told us you're 18. They know you're 12.
Or a little 12-year-old Stewart Home. Yes, I'm 18.
18, yeah. I was always baby-faced and never looked my age, so I still got half fare on the bus without asking till I was 26 and refused service in pubs until I was over 30. I think they just thought it was, they couldn't see why they were X films, and they, rules weren't strictly enforced in the 70s, because I didn't smoke, but every child I knew smoked, and they could buy the cigarettes in the shops, but there were the machines outside the shops, so no one was checking the age because, there used to be cigarette machines everywhere in the 70s. So that kind of stuff wasn't enforced. So yeah, I'd always liked kung fu films, but I didn't get VHS until the 80s, as most other people didn't. And then, you could go down Brick Lane or somewhere and get secondhand VHSs for, not a lot of money, 50p or whatever. So I would always go down and get my secondhand used from the video store, but cheaper than hiring it for weeks on end if you wanted to rewatch it, and discovered a lot of fantastic movies. I mean, that was just one day in the late 80s. I bought a film called Scorpion Thunderbolt, which turned out to be a cut and paste ninja film, which I hadn't come across before. So that's where these Hong Kong producers would buy up pretty much any old film from Southeast Asia, which wasn't saleable in the Western market, would shoot 15 minutes with white actors talking about being ninjas, and often on a Garfield phone, because they thought that was big in the States at the time. So they'd link up the two narratives. If you have one character on a phone in one film, you can have the other character, the ninja tiki. You will return the Golden Ninja Empire warrior statue. No, your Ninja Empire is evil. And they'd literally have these two narratives that made no sense together whatsoever. But this one, Scorpion Thunderbolt, happens to be a Taiwanese horror film mixed in with kind of ninja action. I mean, it's the most insane thing I'd ever seen. And there were also all the kind of copyist Bruce Lee films. So you had the clones of Bruce Lee, and then films riffing the story of his brother, or the real story of Bruce Lee's death. Did he die from oversex, which was a genuine rumor in Hong Kong that he died because he had too much sex.
Yeah, I heard that rumor
from the
too.
time. Yeah, oversex is a risk of a celebrity lifestyle. I'd always had that interest in those films. And then probably around 2005 to about 2010, 11, lots of those films on DVD start turning up on Poundland, often 4 up on a disc. So you pay £1 and get 4 films on a DVD. So I started rewatching a lot of that stuff because it was in Poundland for £1. Or 25p for a film if it was 4 on a disc. And then I was also going over to New York and doing stuff like I had a retrospective at White Columns, mid-career artistic retrospective at White Columns Gallery in New York in 2011. And that was when the DVD thing was beginning to wind down. So there were all these stores around 12th Street and stuff selling that kind of stuff. So the ones I wasn't seeing in the UK in Poundland, I could get down 12th Street in Manhattan when I was there for next to nothing and come back with a huge number of
Yeah, I guess 'cause if
DVDs.
you'd given your documents away, you had a whole suitcase to fill, didn't you, for your.
Well, this was later on, so because I was going to do shows, I was having my air tickets bought for me by then by
Oh, there
other
you
people.
go.
Yeah, yeah.
You
So
moved
yeah,
up
I
the
I
world.
had hold luggage, no problem. This wasn't the 80s anymore. Didn't have DVDs then. But yeah, so I mean, from the 80s and then through the art strike, I spent a lot of time watching kung fu videos and martial arts videos, and then came back to them through the kind of films appearing cheap on DVD in the earlier part of the 21st century, and then eventually wrote a book on the films that riff on Bruce Lee, which.
Yeah, it's such an interesting title, Bruce Exploitation, because actually he was quite exploited in his life. Was that intentional? Is that what? Because I haven't read that book, but was that his
It's about.
intention?
Well,
Or
Bruceploitation describes a subgenre of martial arts films. They're not all necessarily kung fu, because kung fu is Chinese and they're made across the US and also in a lot in Philippines and Korea as well. Although a lot of the Hong Kong companies would go to Korea in the 70s because it was very cheap to film in then, cheaper than filming in Hong Kong. So it's describing the subgenre of films which entails plots that kind of are follow-ons from Bruce Lee films. So, Fist of Fury, as it was in the UK, a Chinese connection in the US. Bruce Lee dies at the end of that, or his character Chen Zhen dies. So you'd have the brother of Chen Zhen in the next Fist of Fury 2. Or you also had all these actors with names like Bruce Lee and Bruce Lai and Dragon Lee. So the audience was supposed to think that these actors were Bruce Lee, but they'd be doing things like battling a stuntman in a gorilla suit in the film. So they're not necessarily that much like Bruce Lee. There's some pretty and then one of the most famous is Clones of Bruce Lee, where a kind of mad evil scientist, after Bruce Lee dies, gets his body because they need the government needs Bruce Lee to save the world, and makes 3 clones, none of whom look like each other, of
so they're
Bruce Lee.
failed clones.
They work as kung fu fighters, but in the end, the scientist goes mad, and rather than saving the world from crime, he wants to take over the world with them. So they have to kind of he sets them to battle each other, but this is foiled, and then he gets killed by his own clones. But yeah, Clones of Bruce Lee, and there's kind of a lot of stop shots. So Queen Elizabeth Hospital, where Bruce Lee's body was taken after he died in Betty Ting Pei's apartment, features in many of the films. I mean, that's where Clones of Bruce Lee starts, basically, with the body being rushed into the hospital with exterior shots of
And
it.
then they nick the DNA, or they.
Yeah, and
Okay.
create the clones with test tubes and whatever else. So
It's like,
yeah.
do you ever read that book, The Boys from Brazil,
Oh yeah.
about the Hitler clones?
Yeah,
Those
there's a.
boys that are cloned from Hitler. It's like,
Yeah, no, I think I've seen the film rather than read the book, but yeah.
I
There's
didn't know there was a film.
yeah, there's a film, yeah.
Well, the clone idea is great.
Yeah. So that's that's a book just about that aspect of martial arts films. It was great because the first time I went, only been once sadly, I would like to go back to Manila. I suddenly understood what all the montage shots in a lot of the films were. It was, like the tourist highlights, like when you have American or Chinese films shot in London and they show Tower Bridge and Buckingham Palace. It's like suddenly I understood when I was looking at it. It was the equivalent in downtown Manila.
Yeah, it's not a very attractive city, but they filmed Apocalypse Now in the Philippines.
Yeah, they filmed a lot of them. They had a big
Mm.
film industry. The Marcoses, Ferdinand Marcos, the dictator, and his wife, bigged up the film industry, and so a lot of Vietnam, most Vietnam War films are probably shot in the Philippines.
Do you know, a friend of mine went to Manila in the 80s, and he was shown around the palace where the Marcoses lived.
Yeah.
And there was this huge crystal dome, which was full of this very fine green powder.
Yeah.
And he asked what it was, and it was $1 million shredded for that's what Ferdinand Marcos wanted.
Yeah.
Whereas, of course, Imelda was spending the money on shoes.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, Can you? Anyway, it's so decadent. It's just awful.
Yeah, no, there's a Australian filmmaker called Andrew Leavitt who made a documentary about a Filipino actor called Weng Weng, who's a midget. So he did films like For Your Height Only. These are these Filipino.
Oh, is he Odd Job in the James Bond movies?
No, that Odd Job does actually turn up in some Sakura turn up in some Bruceploitation films. No, this is a dwarf actor, but anyway, he went to interview Imelda Marcos about her, and it's this. Well, if you're familiar with the politics of the Philippines and the Marcos family, I don't know how naive he genuinely was, but he goes in as this kind of a naive filmmaker and asks Imelda Marcos questions about Weng Weng, the famous action dwarf superstar of Filipino film of the 70s, and it's just you're kind of terrified for him. As you're watching the films thinking this could go terribly wrong, but he sometimes somehow manages to pull it off.
What he could literally call, they say, off with his head or something like that.
Yeah, or get the heavies in. I mean, they weren't in power when he shot this, but they still had a lot of influence and plenty of heavies and money. But yeah, but I mean, I find the Philippines are an incredibly welcoming place.
They are very much. In fact,
Really
I just went there this summer with my daughter because she's learning to scuba dive, and it was.
Yeah. Oh, you've got the coral reefs are amazing. Yeah.
The people are fantastic, really, really. And I always heard terrible things about the food, but actually the food was great. So.
No, the food is good. Got some amazing bananas and stuff because just like varieties you never see anywhere else. So.
Yeah.
But I like Manila. I mean, Dumaguete kind of is probably more where people might want to go, but Manila's cool too.
Yeah, we only spent a day in Manila, but we were in Dumaguete.
Yeah.
It was a lovely place, and the people are just so hospitable, really friendly, and it was great. Yeah.
Yeah, no, talk to anyone. You'd just be hanging out on the beach and some guy would come up and start talking to you. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, fascist yoga, Stewart. What provoked you to write this book?
Well, given that I combine a visual art and a literary career and a lot of the visual art is performance, I always like to perform from my fiction. So I never wanted to read from the book. So I recited from memory. And having been born in South London and having a South London accent, as you can hear, we don't open our mouths a lot. So I also have quite a stone face. So Ken Campbell, an artist who also did a lot of ventriloquism, he saw me read one time, and I didn't know him, but he came up to me afterwards and said, "You were born to be a ventriloquist. I want to teach you have to be a ventriloquist." And sadly, I mean, because he's a great guy, I didn't have time to learn from him, but I learned on my own later on. I was just busy at the time, and Ken's dead, sadly, now. But he was the one who alerted to me to this latent talent I didn't know I had. So I was doing ventriloquism to do my readings and pretending to be too drunk to remember the passages from the book, so the puppet would...
So your readings were, in effect,
performances. So yeah, from
and you did a lot on your head.
Yeah, I got the idea that I would stand on my head because I could do my reading standing on my head. So, I went to a local gym in South Islington and did my weightlifting and boxing. But they, yoga classes were included in the membership. That was the only place they did headstands. So I went to the yoga classes. And the first one I went to, I got a really bad reaction from the other students because I thought, well, I'll go to the boxing class and there's a yoga class after. I asked at the desk and they said, yeah, they do headstands in that. And I just stayed in. And then these yoga students came in and they complained to the teacher that I shouldn't be allowed in the class because they'd seen that I was in the boxing class before the yoga class in the same space.
That's crazy.
No, I know. And the teacher had to say, well, I was within my rights. I paid my gym membership. I was entitled to go to whatever classes I wanted.
But also, that's like saying, look, your earlier comment about if you like Northern Soul, you can't possibly like anything else. This is nuts.
Yeah, no, it is. But, that was what it was. But anyway, the instructor had to be hospitable, but, moved on to talking about things like chakras and meridians and, strange bodily energies that I didn't think existed. And I thought...
back to the mystical...
Yeah, the mystical stuff.
Yeah.
So I thought this is quite incredible. I was going back and practicing at home because I wanted to do my headstand. So, the first teacher I went to, she quite soon asked me, "You've learned to do a headstand very fast. Why is that?" And I said, "Well, I practice all the time at home." And she said, well, why were you so desperate to do a headstand? I said, oh, well, I write books and, I'm reading from my books standing on my head. She said, you can't do that. That's not possible. I said, well, I've done it in Paris and I've done it in wherever else I'd done it at the time, Berlin, and I'm about to do it in London. So, yeah, I can
And
do it.
how long do you maintain the headstand for?
I mean, now I don't do so long. And I also, they taught the basket headstand like this, whereas
Yeah.
I prefer the tripod gymnastic. But the basket was the first I'd learned. But I would do up to half an hour, which is not what I do now. I do 5-10 minutes at the most.
I was going to say, didn't you get to, how did you feel when you came down after half an hour?
I felt fine because, you've got to perform and you just get used
Maybe.
to it. But, I got older and I had a shoulder injury, which was what actually decided me against doing so long. I had to be a little bit more careful. That wasn't from doing yoga, that was from doing weightlifting. But I just got fascinated by the craziness. So I started reading up about yoga. And but this was 2009 when I started on it, and 2016 I saw a newspaper article about a fascist who did yoga, but they were talking about it as though it was something weird. But I was familiar with countercultural fascism in other forms, so I was aware of fascists being into kind of tarot and all kinds of.
Before we go, what is your definition of a fascist?
Well, it's someone who is in favour of a kind of authoritarian leadership in society, usually has racist views, but, in favour of society being run as a dictatorship rather than as a democracy where everyone has a say in what goes on. I can give a more eloquent answer, and I've read plenty of books of, there's a lot of disagreement about how you theorise fascism, but I would also say it is something
For
that
you,
you take.
the biggest thing is authoritarianism.
Yeah, yeah. It's,
Okay.
and a kind of othering of certain groups
Yes.
on whatever basis.
Usually of minority groups.
Yes, usually of minority groups, although, whether you think women are a minority, they're treated as such. Yeah. So, yes, I saw this piece about this bizarre, the journalist thinking it was counterintuitive that a fascist should be into yoga and tarot and kind of spirituality and prediction and stuff. But I was familiar with countercultural fascists into kind of runes and tarot and all that stuff. So I thought, well, where there's one, there must be more. So I started doing a little bit of research and found some more fascist yogis, although the book isn't just about fascist yogis. There's 3 sections. The first is kind of pre-fascism because we start with Pierre Bernard, who was certainly doing yoga by 1910 and possibly by 1905. He had an international tantric order, which only had an American branch in 1905, which published a journal, number 5 of the journal, which was the only issue because making it number 5 probably made people think that there were 4 that preceded it, although there weren't.
Quite clever, really.
Yeah. So, and he didn't write a huge amount himself, but his followers did write stuff, and they were clearly white supremacists. But if you go along with Zeev Sternhell in The Birth of Fascist Ideology, who I think is a very interesting historian and theorist, but people disagree with him, then fascism emerged in France in 1913. Therefore, Pierre Bernard, who was definitely a yogi with white supremacist and Aryanist tendencies in 1910, couldn't have been a fascist yogi in 1910 because fascism didn't exist. I mean, exactly where, and when you move on to Rijeka, which in Italian is called Fiume, which is what the name you see more generally used in English language discourse as well, but I like to use the term Rijeka because it signifies which side of a certain political struggle you're on. That was occupied by Gabriele D'Annunzio in 1919, who was a Italian poet who thought he was the greatest Italian writer since Dante. He was actually...
But that was self-declared, wasn't it?
Self-declared, yeah. I think he was self-deluded as well. Very bombastic.
Well, the fact that I've never heard of him probably bears that out. Whereas, obviously I've heard of Dante. So there you go.
He wasn't the greatest Italian writer since Dante. Anyway, he sort of led this ragtag army of Adriti and whatever else into Rijeka. After the First World War, which was a disputed territory. It's now in Croatia. One of his assistants was a guy called Guido Keller, who was founded with Giovanni Cosimo and some kind of Italian futurists who were in there with Marinetti, first of all, they had a column in the Futurist newspaper for their group yoga, and then they had their own yoga newspaper, tastefully decorated with a swastika, of course. So this was in 1920. They were doing this stuff. It came to an end quite quickly because there was a treaty that resolved the issue of the status of Rijeka, and they got shot at by Italian naval ships and had to abandon the kind of occupation. But while this was going on, D'Annunzio and his assistants created the kind of theatre of fascism, so the balcony speeches, the Roman salutes, the treatment of those who fell in for the cause as along religious lines, a secularized religion of martyrs, political martyrs. So all that got kind of fed through mainstream fascism and into Nazism, because while all Nazis are fascists, not all fascists are Nazis, because Nazism is just one type of fascism. So, Mussolini's rise is tied to that occupation because he supported it, and that was an element within his rise to create a fascist state in Italy as well. So there's a yoga connection there, which was the first one I went on to, and then there's a whole subsequent connected to Pierre Bernard, one of his followers, Francis Yates Brown. And the thing is, most of these people tell false stories about where they learned their yoga. So,
totally. Yeah. It was a total con. Yeah.
Yeah. So Yates Brown, in his kind of best-selling Bengal Lancer book, which the film with Gary Cooper, which bears about as much relationship to the book as the book does to Yates Brown's life, was one of Hitler's favourites. And supposedly, when Hitler told him how much he liked the film of his book, Yates Brown was very happy. But anyway, there have been academic historians like Kate Imey who've searched the archives, which are in universities, of Yates Brown, and also Jeff C. Fuller. So Yates Brown learned yoga in Nyack, New York, with Pierre Bernard in the mid-20s. And if you read his earlier books like Caught by the Turks from 1919, which was a failure, he
wasn't also a pack of a farrago of untruths, as I think Sharma would describe it.
Yeah, he wrote a book about being imprisoned by the Turks and dressing up as a good German governess to escape them in the First World War.
Great story.
Who wouldn't want to dress up like a German governor? But whether they need to escape from somewhere or not. But in the first book length telling of this, there's no yoga, and then he learnt yoga with Pierre Bernard, and when he retells the story in later books, yoga
he shoehorns the yoga in.
Yeah, he shoehorns it in.
Yeah.
And also, so he wasn't aligned to a fascist party in the UK, but he was a fascist supporter and wrote articles in support of fascism, and knew all the main fascist leaders, and wrote books supporting fascism as well, basically, and how great Hitler was in his books and that kind of stuff.
Hitler was not a yoga fan, was he?
No, Hitler wasn't, but Himmler was.
Yeah.
But I was going to stick with the British before I got onto the Germans.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. It's hard to tell the story or know how someone else wants to tell it. So, yeah, you had JFC Fuller, who was a disciple of Aleister Crowley, who I mentioned earlier, who learned his yoga from Crowley, but like Yates Brown, claimed to have learned it in India when he was there as a soldier. But again, Kate Imey has done the archival research to disprove that. But it's also, if you read their text, you can kind of see it as well. It's shown in various ways. But Fuller was a top member of the British Union of Fascists. He was a paid-up, card-carrying member of the biggest British fascist party. Also, he was a military theorist and historian, so he was very interested in mechanised war. So he came up with the ideas of mechanised warfare that the Nazis turned into the blitzkrieg tactic that they used in the Second World War. And again was invited like Yates Brown as a guest of honour to events by Hitler and other big fascist leaders. And there's the story, which may or may not be apocryphal, which when Fuller was invited to watch a militarised parade of Nazi hardware, Hitler turned to him and said, "How do you like your children, Herr Fuller?" To which Fuller replied, "I hardly recognise them." Because the Nazis had done so much with his theories around mechanised warfare. So, there's a lot of fake literature, which is essentially fiction but marketed as non-fiction about Nazi occultists and Nazi occultism. It goes back to books like Morning of the Magicians by Powles and Berger, who were a couple of French writers in the 50s. And that's been taken up by people like Hugh Trevor Ravenscroft with The Spear of Destiny, and there's endless books about the Nazis and the occult, most of which isn't true in terms of context. There are some more reliable writers on that kind of field debunking a lot of the other stuff. But Himmler was interested in Indian religion, influenced by an Indiologist called Hauer. But, within the Nazi Party, there was a split in what was considered to be the best religion for National Socialism. So you had some people supporting Christianity, some people supporting kind of Norse paganism, and within the SS an interest in Indian religion, because what you have, this is precisely how Pierre Bernard's disciples described what they were doing in yoga as the 5,000-year-old invention of the Aryan invaders of the Indus Valley. So these are beef-eating Brahmins who had blonde hair and blue eyes.
Absolute nonsense, isn't
No,
it?
it's absolute nonsense, because Aryan referred to kind of linguistic and cultural distinctions, not to ethnicity originally anyway. But
And I've always found it so ironic, Hitler being so obsessed with the Aryans when he was a little dark mustachioed, no relation to the Aryans whatsoever.
But so there's that theory. So, in terms of Hamish Maclaren, who was another Pierre Bernard follower, the great Om, who wrote books, he thought that Aryans should follow Tantra and yoga precisely because it was an Aryan religion, whereas Christianity was Semitic. He was rather anti-Semitic, Maclaren.
A lot of them were, yeah.
So, so there were those arguments within Nazism. And then obviously you have the figures like Savitri Devi, who was a supporter of National Socialism from quite early on, and was obsessed with Aryanism, and from a kind of mixed English, French, Greek background, had gone to India to kind of find living Aryanism there. After the war, she tried to refound National Socialism as a religion, so she saw Hitler as the late-born child of light, or he who returned whenever he was needed.
Yes, I remember. I've got to say, I found it very funny.
So she basically said that Hitler was the 10th incarnation of Vishnu as Kalki. And you can compare that to a lot of the QAnon theory, where, which I do in the book, where people think that Donald Trump is this supernatural being within QAnon theory, come to save the world from pizza-eating pedophiles and cannibalistic pizza-eating pedophiles. So Davey kind of portrays Hitler as this supernatural savior as well. There's
talk about backing a losing horse. This is after it's lost as well. This is just crazy. It's a completely nonsensical, deluded rubbish. It is. But the thing is that I've done yoga for years in various, I never keep it up for long, but I always restart it, and I do it sort of little bits at a time. And so I've done it in many forms and many classes, and I have never, no one's ever tried to recruit me to a fascist army. However, they do bang on about chakras and things like that. I just ignore it. I just do yoga because it makes me feel good afterwards, and that's good enough for me. I don't want eternal life. I don't want any of this other stuff,
I mean, the thing that I think is problematic is the wellness ideology as much as anything else. So I certainly heard when I stopped going to yoga before the pandemic. So I went from 2009 to 2019, and I heard a lot of anti-vax talk, which was anti-MMR at the time. And now we're seeing the results of that. We've got kids dying. And I think that's a problem. I wouldn't say any of the instructors I encountered were configured politically, but I came across some very reactionary students and heard some really quite appalling political opinions.
The anti-vax thing is terrible, and I agree with you. And there are some children who can't get vaccinated, for example, if they have cancer or horrible morbidities, and they actually rely on the rest of the population getting vaccinated. So it is really irresponsible. It's terrible, but I don't think it's like necessarily associated with yoga.
No, I mean, the thing is that the yoga influences during the pandemic, like Crystal Tinney or other ones you could take, did come out as very strongly anti-vax. And there's other people quoted in the book who have those positions. Some of them got into the QAnon conspiracy theory as well. And it is something that is associated with yoga, which is opened up. I mean, one of the things I found going to the yoga classes and talking to people, that some of them would start telling you about papers like The Light, which is an awful new age far right paper. It features articles by people from the Homeland Party and other fascist groups within it, and they'd be talking about how there was no longer any left right, and this is the kind of pastoral QAnon thing that I'm talking about. You won't find it in every yoga class, and I have come across yoga instructors who are pro-masking as well as anti-masking, but it did seem to be a problem with certainly with my experiences, and then researching the book, I certainly found more.
Well, you obviously felt strong enough about it to write a book. I mean, that does take a level of passion, which, you have to respect. But I've always associated yoga with the sort of lefty progressive stuff. And, there's the almond latte guzzling lot from California, which is very different to. But I do believe that a lot of it was made up by
Yeah.
shysters who wanted to make money and who used it as a way of selling a pup to very credulous people who couldn't accept their own mortality,
Yeah. The left-wing thing you're describing, I think, partly comes out of the 60s counterculture, which I think is often misread as left when it's often libertarian, which, it's anarchism goes from left to right. So you have anarcho-communists and you have anarcho-capitalists, and the libertarians are more on that side. And certainly when you look at how the counterculture was funded, which I can see from my own mother's life and her friends and her circle, but also more broadly, you see that it was drugs and prostitution, which a lot of libertarians would like legalized. I mean, let's not get into an argument about drugs and legalization of prostitution. I'm not necessarily opposed to those things, but I'm saying that was the funding, and there was a kind of more libertarian element, and it could be misread as left, but I don't think the counterculture overall was particularly left wing. But then you had all the kind of Maharishi stuff coming up with the Beatles, so that's why people make those associations and think of hippies and yoga. But I don't necessarily think that makes it left wing.
No, you're quite right. It's I don't think it's necessarily of any wing. It just proves that, I suppose, just because, for example, Hitler loved dogs doesn't mean dogs are intrinsically evil.
Oh,
It's
no.
So I wouldn't necessarily write off the whole of yoga, but I do think it's really interesting to be aware of this history. And I just wondered, have you had any sort of backlash against your treatise, for example, from Indians who actually, a lot of them are very knocked off that yoga's been used by influencers and it's basically been commoditized to make money, hasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things people tell me, because I haven't been to India, my mother had been to India for extended lengths of time, but I've never been, is that the yoga schools are full of white students.
Yeah.
When you go to India, and not Indians. But I actually had a really nice review from the Hindu. Was it last
Oh,
week?
did you?
Yeah. It was touching. I mean, it was a very interesting reading of the book, but it was pleading for understanding the not claiming yoga so much as kind of Indian and specifically Hindu, but understanding that there were all sorts of things feeding into it. What I try to do in the book is make a distinction between postural practice, or what's practiced in gyms and yoga studios in the West, and ancient Indian meditation techniques.
Yeah, and actually, the postural practice is usually used by, for example, yummy mummies so they can look good in a bikini. It's got nothing to do with the spiritual or meditative side at all, whatever they might say.
No, I know. So but certainly some Western yoga people who didn't like the book, but that's the way it goes. If you're gonna, I mean, that was what happened. Whenever a book is more successful, you get more negative reactions. I mean, Dead Princess was my most successful novel in English, I mean, it changes depending on what language you put in. That got some fantastic reviews on Goodreads because it reached readers who wouldn't normally read me. And my favorite review was, "This book is fucking stupid." Which a friend of mine who also writes, Christopher Nosbinall, his pen name, thought that was such a great review that he actually wrote a book using the title.
That's brilliant.
So, but it's I think if you write, it's quite interesting because when you go and look at reviews of books, if a book hasn't really reached very far, you'll find nothing but positive reviews. And if it has reached further, you'll find some really negative reviews and more split
Exactly.
opinions.
You need that classic J curve. So
Yeah.
mostly positive, but actually you need some negative reviews to prove that the book is genuine. Because who's going to like it? What book is going to be liked by everybody?
No,
I mean,
nothing can be liked by everybody,
exactly.
whether it's a song, whether it's a film, whether it's a play, a TV program, or a book. If it reaches a reasonable number of people, some of them are going to dislike it.
Exactly. And in fact, I'm a member of 2 book clubs, and there's nothing more fun than having a good old ding dong with someone you're polarized about on a book.
Exactly. Yeah. Because if everyone loved the book, it would be really boring and there would be nothing much to
Exactly.
discuss.
Exactly.
So yeah, there have been some negative reactions, but I'm quite used to that and quite happy about it.
But people who bang on about chakras and things actually should have the veil lifted because it is a load of nonsense. And I don't know if you've heard of this guy, David Webster. He wrote, I think he's a lecturer at some university, and he wrote this book called Despirited, which was how New Age and spiritualism and all that is actually making people depressed and unhappy because you're aiming for something that's just not possible. And actually, one of the preconditions for a happy life is to accept your mortality. Just accept there possibly is nothing else in the afterlife, and just make the best of this one. And once you accept that, your life actually becomes a lot more relaxed and meaningful.
No, it sounds great. I haven't read the book, but
It is a really good book. I'm sure that's what it was called, Dispirited. Yeah,
yeah.
that's it. And it
No.
starts with this great quote. It's like, when someone tells me that they are not religious, but they're deeply spiritual, I want to punch them very hard in the face.
There's a writer who was called Robin Cook that had to write in the 80s as Derek Raymond because he had 10 years off from his career, during which time another Robin Cook, an American author, became very successful with blockbusters. But he, one of his great quotes was, "I like intellectual arguments that end in violence." But he was, he went and lived abroad for a long time, and when he came back in the 80s, a load of us got to know him. He was a really interesting guy, real character, and wrote some really interesting. He was writing detective novels when he did his comeback, but more literary novels in the 60s. But yeah, that's a great quote.
It is a great quote. Yeah.
So he's worth having a look at because he has such a great quote.
But
the other thing I was going to say about the yoga is I also think people should just look. I can't stop people doing yoga, and if that's what they want to do, that's what they're going to do. But I do think, one, they should know something more of the history and the kind of charlatanism that has gone into it, and two, they should look at it as exercise and compare it to other exercise, because it depends what they're trying to get out of exercise.
Yes.
But it's not necessarily a particularly effective exercise for certain things. Like, if you do Tai Chi, you're working the legs a lot more, and as people get older, falls are a thing that often lead to injury and death. So that might be better. But also, obviously the thing that's fashionable now, which I'm very pleased with, is heavy weightlifting, and that will, you can really build your legs with squats and deadlifts at heavy weight. It depends what you look. If you're just looking to relax for an hour or two, then it's great. And there are some difficult yoga postures. If you can call it a planche in gymnastics or peacock in yoga. And you do need a certain amount of core strength to do that.
Yeah.
You have to build up to it.
For example, or yeah.
But that's not something I've seen actually taught in any class I've ever been to, and I went into the low thousands number of classes. I mean, people criticise me because I say in the book I barely had to go outside Islington to learn all this stuff, because it all comes to Islington. But the gym I went to had a yoga class every day, and often two. So, I could easily go to 7 yoga classes in a week and try a lot of different styles. I mean, some I would only do once. I mean, For example, Iyengar, I absolutely hated Iyengar, and the teacher realised I could do some yoga. When I went to the class, she'd allegedly studied under Iyengar, and was quite old. And she said,
What's the
"Can you?"
difference between that and other yogas?
Well, Iyengar is very much focused on the alignment, and they spend a lot of time arranging the props to do the poses. So
Okay.
quite slow and easy. But anyway, she asked me if I could do a headstand, and I said yes, and she said, "Well, do one." So I just did a headstand in the middle of the floor, and she started screaming at me, "You don't do it in the middle of the floor, you do it against the wall." Well, I hadn't been to an Iyengar class, how did I know?
And also, you should have said to her, actually, hold on a tick, and I'll just start reciting my book for half an hour.
Yeah, I should have done. Yeah, well, fill up the yoga class. I mean, the other thing that was weird about that class, I never went back, was there was a guy, an old guy, who lay at the back of the room for the entire class with a towel over his face.
In corpse pose.
Yeah, in corpse pose, yeah, but with a
Okay.
towel over his face. And she gave me a leaflet about some guru when I went, which I, put in the bin on the way out of the
Of
gym.
course you did. And, I don't put any value in these ridiculous claims. I do yoga because I like to stretch and it makes me feel good afterwards. That's it. And,
Yeah.
I think you have to know what it's for. And actually, I saw a quote by you about Tai Chi where someone was claiming that Tai Chi is something like 5,000 years old and has this ancient history. And, there are lots of people who get a lot out of Tai Chi, but I totally agreed with you. I think you said something like, it's just because it's old doesn't mean it's good.
No, it doesn't.
So,
Because someone could have invented something yesterday, but if you find a fantastic exercise system that works for you, then it doesn't matter that it was invented yesterday.
exactly.
And
And
someone had to
actually,
make it up sometime.
it's a really
Well,
good thing, I think, that women are doing more weightlifting and bodybuilding because obviously they were always terrified in the past that it would, they'd start looking like Sylvester Stallone, whereas we know that doesn't happen. And actually, it's really good for your bone density
no, it is really good.
and
And
it
your
helps
muscle.
with, so you can't just stick with yoga. You should be doing other things as well.
No, I agree. You should do some cardio too. But
Mhm.
if you're only going to do one thing, I'd do the strength training. And the only way you can look like Arnold Schwarzenegger is to take steroids. There's no, whether
Or
you're a man or
actually,
a woman.
or get a good genetic hand.
Yeah, well, I think the steroids for the really big guys. You can build quite a lot of muscle without steroids, but if you want to look like some of those the really big bodybuilders, steroids is the only way to do
Yeah,
it.
that's true.
And again, I think there's a lot of moral panic around steroids. Yes, they can have poor effects, but I think the whole thing around roid rage is kind of overhyped. I'm not saying people should do steroids. I certainly don't. And I do the weight training, but it depends what people want to do. It's if they really want to be that big, then that's the way to do it, and they should evaluate whether the risks are worth the benefits for them.
I know, but the problem is vanity is it's such an overpowering force, isn't it? People do
Yeah.
all sorts of really silly things in the name of vanity, and maybe they should be protected from themselves sometimes. I don't know.
Well, I think if people have the information and haven't been, you know, conned with a load of bullshit, then
Yeah.
let them make the choice. Because I do think there is a moral panic around roid rage and steroids, but at the same time, I don't think it's a good idea to do them. And I also think it's good that smoking is banned in indoor places, which it wasn't when I was a kid, and I used to go to clubs full of smoke. But at the same time, I wouldn't stop people smoking, although I tell them it's not a good idea.
Yeah. Have you always stayed away from substances when you were part of the art scene and everything? Were you never tempted to get involved in any of the sort of the drug taking
No, the
and
drug taking's boring. Yeah.
good for
And
you?
my mother took enough drugs for the next 10 generations of the family, so I don't need
Yeah.
to.
See,
She did it for me.
okay. When I was at school, do you remember the band Free with
Yeah.
Paul
Kosmos.
Potoff? And
Yeah.
he died of a heroin overdose. And when I was at school, his father, David Kossoff, who was an actor, he used to go around schools and he did impersonations of what his son was like when he was under the influence of heroin. It was so powerful and made such an impression on me that I never touched heavy stuff at all. I mean, I always had a bit of weed maybe, and I used to smoke like a two-stroke engine, but I never did anything more than that.
Yeah.
And I really wish I'd written to him at some point to tell him. And by the time I thought about it, he was already dead. He was a very old man when he died, I think.
Yeah.
So Yeah, so I stayed off the hard stuff too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are you working on at the moment?
I'm looking at a whole lot of things. I mean, I have a novel written in first draft, which I'm not in any hurry to publish because it was the kind of lockdown novel. And I think it's easier, it's more interesting to leave a little bit of time. So I'm not revising that, and I've been very busy doing the promotion for this, but thinking about, do I want to talk about Christianity and exercise next? I mean, there's actually I've got all these books that I picked up cheap. I have a whole load of Christian yoga books, for example.
I
Uh,
thought there was a contradiction in terms.
no,
Is
I
that
mean, this was interesting because I had someone ask a question saying, but surely Christians don't like yoga, when I was doing a talk about the book. But yeah, I've got several books by J.M. Duchenne, who's the most famous one, the most famous book being Christian Yoga. But I also have these books like Yoga and the Jesus Prayer Tradition. I'm trying to remember who the author is. It's on the shelf in the other room. There was Christians in the 60s and 70s interested in yoga to develop their Christian spirituality. But, if you go back to kind of muscular Christianity in the 19th century, which, Tom Brown's School Days and Tom Brown at Oxford are the kind of classic expositions of that in fictional form.
the best thing about that book was Flashman. And that whole, the George MacDonald Fraser books, which,
Yeah.
so funny.
But yeah, I mean, my last book, Art School Orgy, I hung the story on a frame taken from Tom Brown at University, which isn't as well known as Tom Brown's School Days.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I wanted to ask you, because that book tells the story of David Hockney, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And of a character called David Hockney. Did the real David Hockney at any point complain about you borrowing his name, or did
No,
he just?
it wasn't just Hockney, it was all his contemporaries at the Royal College of Art, although it's the Republican College of Art in the book. But I think he has a sense of humour,
Yeah.
and no one would publish the book. It ended up coming out with an indie record label because they wanted to get into book publishing because they weren't scared of it. But it turned out the guy who runs it has a friend who knows Hockney's lawyers, and they all thought it was hilarious and didn't have a problem with it. So,
Okay. Good.
David Hockney has a sense of humour, and
Yeah.
it came out with it published in this weird way. But then a friend of mine was in New York and had a copy of the book which she was taking for her friend to give to a friend, and they're friends with Danny Fields, who's a friend of Hockney, but also famously managed the Stooges and the Ramones, if you know your kind of rock history.
I know the Ramones. Yeah.
Yeah. The Stooges was Iggy Pop's band before he was solo. So anyway, Danny Fields, who's a big friend of Hockney, saw the book lying on the table because it'd been brought around as a present for the hostess, and picked it up and saying, "Oh, does David know about this? He'll think it's hilarious." He was just reading it and roaring with laughter and said, "I'm sorry, but I have to take the book." So,
That was it. The cover is you with a blow up doll. It's really funny. It's brilliant. And it's delightful to hear that he's got a sense of humor about it. Good.
yeah, no, which is great. There's not been a peep out of the lawyers who the publisher has had dinner with, so
Yeah.
they seem perfectly happy. But I did get some offers from kind of more regular publishers to do the book, but only if I changed the names.
And of course that would have taken all the fun out of it.
It would have done, yeah.
Yeah.
So you just do what you can do. And, so that was a small book, but, it was a guy learning how to publish. It's a learning curve. And now I've got my bigger book again. Like Dead Princess was a bigger book. So, it's up and down in the old career.
By the way, Stuart, on your website, there are 2 hilarious videos, one of which is you tied to a bed.
Yeah.
And the other is in some nightclub called Bar Sexy.
It's actually because I had a Spanish friend who worked to make a lot of
who
porn.
is that wonderful woman on the video?
Well, Gina Snake is her professional name, but Marlena is her real name. And she was living in London for a long time. Brexit sent her away, and she was a porn actress. And said she'd, do a video to promote that was for a record. And the one where I'm tied up, she was supposed to have a friend, so it was going to be girl on girl action with the screwdriver in the belly button.
Yeah.
But the friend who she knew from a bar or somewhere said she'd do it and then turned up and was too frightened to do it. So, I had a camera woman, I had my actress, so I had no choice but to take her place.
But
Um,
the other, I'll put the links to those videos in the description
They
on
were actually on
YouTube.
on YouTube, and YouTube removed the one in the Club Sexy allegedly, but it's actually just Marlena's bathroom in College Street in London, just south of Camden. But that was on Vimeo for years. I can't remember when. A few months ago, they both got removed.
Maybe someone complained
Because,
or something.
yeah, I think what you can put online has changed. But they had enormous numbers of hits.
They are so funny. And in fact, there's the one of the Club Sexy one where she literally pisses herself.
Yeah.
It does not. We don't say in our house, "Oh, we're going to the loo" anymore. We say, "I pissed myself."
No, she was fantastic, and she's always like, "Oh, I've never done this before." She was really excited because I came up with an idea that she hadn't done on film. So
It was so funny.
she's a real trooper and a real professional. I mean, I think one of the things people don't appreciate is that she actually has a real skill for what she does. It's absolutely brilliant,
and obviously a real sense of humor as well. She was obviously really having fun doing it.
She's having fun, but she's actually a brilliant actress. You just look at her facial expression; she's really talented. And I think it's a shame that women who do what she does, which is make porn, don't always get the appreciation for the actual skill that goes into what they do. But she was fantastic because it was just like, oh, this is fantastic. I've never done this before.
Yeah.
But
Well, porn has there's a real dark side to it. So,
oh yeah,
and obviously there's this whole exploitation thing, which we really needn't get into now, but I can see that there's always going to be a market for it, isn't there? So if there is, I hope people who do it have fun doing it and make money and are not exploited.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely the case with Marlena. She wanted to do it and she was happy doing it, and she had a real talent as well.
I'll put the links to those on the description, and we'll see if YouTube takes it off again. I don't know.
No, well, that's why they're on my website, because they were taken from YouTube and Vimeo. But you just see what you can do. I mean, I did a project called Stewart Home Nude, which was a website where I searched when there were a lot more search engines and things than there are now, when the internet was more diverse. It just consisted of me doing this search, and the searches would affect the algorithm. So that when you did the search, the next time you did the search, the previous search started affecting it. So I was just playing around with the algorithm. And I did that, I think it was originally on WordPress, but I had to re-put it up on a different site because WordPress said I was breaking the rules, which was the rule was manipulating the algorithm for financial gain. But I was only manipulating the algorithm. I wasn't doing it for financial gain. And all it basically consisted of search results, but it was quite interesting to follow through how, using the different search engines and doing a search every day for this term affected the algorithm. Obviously, if you took Madonna as your search term, you're not going to have much impact. You need something slightly more obscure. Even Madonna nude would probably you'd have a hard time impacting. But me nude was definitely worked. But and they, the WordPress obviously became aware that I was manipulating the algorithm. But I didn't think I was breaking the rule because I wasn't doing it for financial gain. I made nothing.
Amazing that they were paying attention as well. So
yeah. But it's amazing why you get pulled and why. But it happens to me a lot. But you've always got to explore the limits of what you can do.
Stewart, I've kept you for so long. It's been really fun chatting to you. It's been brilliant. So good luck with your next book. So is the next book really going to be about Christianity and yoga?
No, well, not just Christianity and yoga. I mean, Christianity and sport.
Okay.
And it's opposite. I mean, I'm not 100% sure. I'm working on the ideas.
And the novel you mentioned, is that...
That's I'm just going to leave it for a while. It's written in first draft, and when I feel like doing the second draft, I'll do it. But I want to probably do a non-fiction book next. I mean, I have a book with PM Press coming out, which is in their outspoken writers series. So that's like some old work, some unpublished work, an interview with me. So that should be out either next year or the year after, depending how fast they are. They were just flabbergasted by the number of changes I wanted made to the contracts.
Okay.
But, you know, I like to talk percentages as well.
Yeah.
And clauses.
Good.
And rights. You know, well, you're saying you want the translation rights. Actually, what kind of translation sales team do you have? You know, these
Well,
are the
yes,
questions
exactly.
authors should be asking. You know, because I did the same with Pluto, and turns out they do have, you know, a good track record of selling translation rights. They had no track record of selling film rights, so I managed to convince them that they shouldn't take them. So I
Well,
have,
we do it on a use it or lose it basis. So we
yeah,
have
yeah,
all rights with our authors, but if they find a better deal than we can offer, then they're free to go with it. So we wouldn't
yeah.
want to hamstring anyone, but yeah.
No, I think it's if the publisher is more likely to sell the rights than you, then fair enough. You know, if they've got a
Mhm.
team dedicated to it, that they get the rights. But if they have where they have a, you know, we argued over the audio rights, but they did have a track record on that as well with Pluto, and
Okay.
they told the audio rights. But you know, with film rights, they're a non-fiction publisher. It's actually hard to sell non-fiction books for film. I mean, I had several people approach me, but I think especially now you've had the documentary boom and that's fallen away. It's very hard to sell a non-fiction book for even for a documentary. But you know,
Surprises me. I thought documentaries were still really big.
I don't think there is, you know, all the producers I'm talking to are saying, no, it's harder because there's a guy who I've kind of vaguely known for 20 years who was interested, as well as kind of big Hollywood people who showed some interest and then went away and didn't come back. But I said, you know, we had a discussion and our conclusion was probably the best thing was to use it, you know, I should write a fiction treatment for it and use the book as a basis, you know, because there's a series of character studies of con men, essentially, the odd con woman as well. And you could kind of morph the characters together because it's the same story again and again. And just do a kind of more contemporary book with a figure like Bernard or whoever else. I just have to find time to write the treatment. But
Yeah.
yeah, we figured that was probably more likely to get funding for film than a documentary. I mean, this producer has been producing documentaries and he's fed up with it and moved into doing more fiction films.
Okay.
Because he's finding it so hard to get the money. So yeah, it changes. But yeah, you know, you can spend a lot of time trying to get a film project off the ground. It's an enormous time waster for a lot of people. I mean, I've certainly had lots of discussions with film people that have taken up lots of time and ended up not
And
really
then they
going
don't go
anywhere.
anywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, only a fraction get made, and only a
exactly.
fraction of those are successful.
Yeah, but I don't mind a publisher taking rights if they've got active people, you know,
Mm.
trying to sell those rights. But if they're just passively waiting for someone to offer, then I don't see why they should have them rather than me.
Yeah, well, and also you presumably know your way around a publishing contract now because you've worked with so many different publishers.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's always good to get some professional advice on top as well. But, you know,
Yeah,
I know where to get that too. So.
there you go. Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
No, my
And
pleasure.
yeah,
Catherine.
good luck with your next project. Yeah, good luck with Fascist Yoga. I hope it gets, widely read and picked up. And
No, it's done really well. So, you know, I'm very
good.
happy.
It's a very
But,
different
yeah,
take
you know,
on.
even more sales will be better.
Exactly.
Okay, great.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stuart.
Okay, take care.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Indie Book Club. I'm your host, Cathy Evans from Inkspot Publishing, who sponsor all these podcasts. To all cooks, dog walkers, and drivers out there, we'd love to see you next time. Bye.